On a busy Friday, July 18, 2025, the United States House of Representatives made a significant decision about government spending. By a very narrow vote of 216 to 213, lawmakers passed a bill to cut $9 billion from the federal budget. This wasn't a surprise move. It came just one day after the Senate approved the very same package with a close vote of 51 to 48. This type of bill, known as a rescissions package, is a special tool that allows a president to ask Congress to take back money that has already been approved but not yet spent. It's a way to trim the budget without going through the usual lengthy and complicated process that requires more votes to pass. The journey of this bill was quite rushed, driven by a strict deadline. The whole process began on June 3, 2025, when President Trump sent a formal request to Congress asking for these specific cuts. According to the law that governs this process, the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974, Congress had only 45 days to act on his request. If they didn't make a decision by the end of Friday, the administration would have been legally required to spend the money as originally planned. This deadline created a sense of urgency, especially for the Republican leaders who wanted to see the cuts approved and deliver a win for the president's agenda. Even though the Republican Party controls the House, getting the votes was not easy. There was some last-minute drama and disagreement within the party itself. A few Republican members were hesitant to support the bill. They wanted to add a separate measure demanding more information about the old Jeffrey Epstein investigation. To solve this, party leaders offered a compromise. They would introduce a different, non-binding resolution to address those concerns. This move helped to gather just enough votes to push the spending cuts bill over the finish line, showing how even a small number of dissenting voices can complicate matters in a closely divided Congress. Now that both the House and the Senate have given their approval, the bill has one final stop before it can become law. It has been sent to the White House, where it now sits on President Trump's desk, awaiting his signature. Since the president was the one who requested these cuts in the first place, it is widely expected that he will sign the bill without any delay. This final step will make the $9 billion in spending reductions official. While this amount is a very small fraction, about 0.1% of the massive $6.8 trillion federal budget, the specific programs it targets have made this a very contentious and closely watched piece of legislation. So where exactly is this $9 billion being cut from? The bill primarily targets two major areas: public broadcasting here at home and foreign aid programs that the United States funds around the world. The money being taken back is what is known as unobligated funds, which means it was set aside by Congress for a specific purpose, but hasn't been officially spent or committed to a contract yet. The biggest cut in the domestic sphere is aimed directly at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the organization that provides federal funding to local public television and radio stations across the country, like PBS and NPR. The bill cancels all the money planned for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting for the fiscal years 2026 and 2027. This decision could have a profound impact on the landscape of American media, particularly for people who rely on public broadcasting for news, educational programming, and cultural content. Supporters of the cut argue that public media should be able to support itself through private donations and corporate sponsorships without taxpayer money. They believe this is a necessary step to reduce government spending. However, opponents worry that losing federal funds will force many smaller stations, especially those in rural and underserved communities, to reduce their services or even shut down completely. These stations often provide the only source of local news or children's educational shows in their areas. The other major area facing deep cuts is foreign aid. The bill rescinds billions of dollars from several key international programs. These include Media Group, Government Press Conference about Foreign Aid, Close-up of International Grant Agreement, stacks of folders labeled with different aid programs at distribute_equally, the Economic Support Fund, which provides assistance to U.S. allies to promote economic and political stability, the Development Assistance Program, which funds long-term projects in developing countries to address issues like poverty, hunger and education, and migration and refugee assistance, which helps to support refugees and displaced people around the globe. These cuts reflect a broader America First approach, prioritizing domestic spending over international commitments. It is important to note, however, that not all foreign aid programs were targeted. During the negotiations in the Senate, some specific humanitarian initiatives were protected from the chopping block. For instance, Media Group, senators negotiating in committee room, close-up of legislative documents, humanitarian aid workers in the field at stock at distribute equally. Lawmakers made sure to keep the funding for PEPFAR, a major global program dedicated to fighting HIV and AIDS. They also protected food aid programs like Food for Peace and the McGovern-Dole program, which helps to feed school children in developing nations. This shows that even among those who support cutting foreign aid, there was a desire to shield certain life-saving health and hunger initiatives from the budget acts, highlighting the complex moral and political calculations involved. The vote on this $9 billion spending cut package revealed a sharp divide between the two major political parties, with Republicans and Democrats holding fundamentally different views on the issue. For most Republicans, supporting these cuts was a matter of principle and fiscal responsibility. They argue that the federal government spends too much money and that it is their duty to find savings wherever possible, even if the amount seems small compared to the overall budget. They see this bill as a step toward reining in what they consider wasteful spending and reducing the national debt, fulfilling a key promise they have made to their voters. Supporters of the bill also believe that the targeted programs are not essential functions of the federal government. When it comes to public broadcasting, they feel that in a world with hundreds of cable channels and online streaming services, taxpayer-funded media is an unnecessary luxury. Regarding foreign aid, many argue that the United States should focus its resources on challenges at home before sending billions of dollars overseas. They contend that cutting this spending will allow that money to be better used to serve the interests of American citizens directly, reflecting a more isolationist view of America's role in the world and its financial obligations. On the other side of the aisle, Democrats were nearly unanimous in their opposition to the bill. They argue that these cuts are short-sighted and will ultimately harm both American interests and global stability. They see funding for foreign aid not as charity, but as a critical tool of American foreign policy. By helping to stabilize fragile countries, promote democracy, and provide humanitarian relief, they believe the United States strengthens its own security and builds important alliances. Cutting these programs, they warn, could create power vacuums that are filled by rival nations like China and Russia, thereby diminishing American influence on the world stage. Democrats also fiercely defended public broadcasting, emphasizing its importance for rural and low-income Americans. They point out that for many people in areas without reliable broadband internet or diverse media markets, PBS and NPR are essential sources of trusted news, emergency information, and educational content for children. They argue that defunding the Corporation for Public Broadcasting would weaken the social fabric and create an information gap that commercial media cannot fill. In their view, these cuts are not about fiscal discipline but are an attack on public services and a retreat from America's leadership role, all for a savings amount that barely makes a dent in the national budget. With President Trump expected to sign the bill into law, these changes will soon begin to take shape, and their effects could be felt in various aspects of daily life. For Americans living in rural areas, the most immediate impact might be on their local public radio and television stations. Without the federal funding distributed by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, these smaller stations may struggle to stay on the air. This could mean the loss of popular children's shows, in-depth local news coverage, and emergency weather alerts that many communities depend on. While urban stations with larger donor bases might survive, the media landscape for millions of other Americans could become much more limited. The cuts also come at a time when President Trump's popularity on key issues is showing signs of weakness. According to a recent poll from the Associated Press, NORC Center for Public Affairs Research, the president's approval ratings on his handling of government spending and immigration have been slipping. This spending cut bill, while popular with his core base of supporters, could further alienate voters who are concerned about the loss of public services or who disagree with cutting America's international commitments. The narrow margin of the vote in Congress suggests that these issues are divisive not just between parties, but also within the broader American public. Beyond our borders, the reduction in foreign aid is likely to be felt across the globe. U.S. allies who rely on American financial support for security and economic stability may feel abandoned, potentially pushing them to seek partnerships with other global powers. Humanitarian organizations that work to address poverty, disease, and refugee crises will have fewer resources to carry out their missions. While some critical health programs were spared, the overall message sent by these cuts is one of American withdrawal from the international stage. This could lead to increased instability in volatile regions, and a decline in the soft power and influence the United States has long enjoyed. Ultimately, this $9 billion package of cuts, while a small percentage of the total budget, represents a significant shift in priorities. It signals a move away from investing in public media and international diplomacy and toward a more inwardly focused definition of national interest. For the average American citizen, the consequences may range from changes in their daily media consumption to the more abstract long-term effects of a shifting global order. Whether these changes will lead to a stronger, more prosperous America as supporters hope, or a more isolated and less secure nation as opponents fear, is a question that will only be answered in the years to come.